can put your questions as we start in the chat box. We will be sending out our GIPRA flyers, GIPRA link for you to do a survey and let us know how you like this training and what more you'd like us to have in the future. Also reach out to I or Natasha at the end of this training if you like see your points. Thank you so much. I'll hand over to Avis.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I was asked in November or December if I could provide a series on family and relationship matters. And this first presentation that I'm doing is an introduction to family therapy. And the third one, I'm going to focus it to be specifically for Native Americans, for work with Native Americans. And I do research for my presentations. So as I've been doing research for the family one on Natives, there's not a lot of information out there. I've spent hours online and even in the university library looking. So we need people to do family therapy research. The second one, we'll be giving a poll at the end of this presentation. I am focused on theory and some technique here. And again, this is an introduction and I'm basing it on this book here from my family therapy class that I had when I was in school. I don't know if it's coming through right. It's called The Essentials of Family Therapy. And if you guys like what I'm giving today, I can do more of the same, but cover different techniques and different theories. And the poll has a list of topics that I can meet. And if there's something that, like I said, if there's something you guys want to hear, I'm always open to meeting special requests. Just a little about myself. My name is Dr. Garcia. I am from the Wind River Reservation here in Wyoming. I live in Cheyenne, Wyoming, which is the capital of our state. I am an executive director of a nonprofit outpatient substance abuse treatment program. And I am a member of the Northern Arapaho tribe from Wyoming, and I'm also affiliated with the Eastern Shoshone tribe on the reservation. My father was Eastern Shoshone, and I have been in the addiction field since 2001. I earned my master's degree in counseling at the University of Wyoming. And several years later, after my youngest daughter graduated from high school, I decided I was ready to go back to school and pursue a PhD. And I believe I was 47 when I went back. So I was pretty late in life when I went back and I earned my PhD in counseling and supervision. And I am also licensed by the state of Wyoming as an addictions therapist and as a professional counselor. So I've been working with substance abuse and mental health for several years now, a couple of decades to be more exact. And I will go on ahead and get started with this presentation. I will take questions and answers at the end. And let me get this going. Like I said, this is the introduction. It's a family series. This is the first one of 3. So today's objectives, we will explain the meaning of family, learn about conflicts, issues, and problems that families have, examine the signs and family problems and triggers for family problems, understand the impact of the family and relationship problems, learn about family counseling, and understand expectations from family counseling. Okay. The other objectives are to know how family counseling helps, understand the reasons for family counseling, examine what is included in family counseling, explain how the counselor helps the family, and learn about what to talk about in group family counseling. So to begin with, what is family therapy? And as a lot of you may know, being Native American, we weren't really exposed to family therapy. A lot of our family therapy was done in the home, usually with our elders present. But like I said, as I gone on to school and I learned a lot about family therapy and addictions work, it is really challenging to include this part into the treatment program, even here off the reservation where I thought I would get more cooperation. We still struggle with client and family participation. Families tend to send the person who's struggling with substance abuse to treatment and want them to get fixed. And the family doesn't look at what all the roles are playing in the home and the family life that could be contributing to that. So a lot of this is based on Western European theory that I've learned in the classroom that I'm going to share with you guys today. Family counseling is an intervention where members in a family identify and change problematic, maladaptive, repetitive relationship patterns and self-defeating belief systems. And that is by Goldenberg and Goldenberg. Again, like I said, a lot of family therapy information is outdated and there's not a lot out there. This approach to treatment considers the identified patient as having a problem as a result of the transactions within the family or community. I always find typos as I do my presentations, even though I know I go through them. A little bit on the history. The origins and development of the field of family therapy are to be found in the second half of the 20th century. It started after the World War II. There was so much loss of life back then. This is the starter for this therapy. And there are many types of family therapy. Almost every theoretical orientation that exists, depending on the therapist and what they choose to use as their theory or framework, is based on their personal choice. The basic ones that I'm going to share with you all today are systemic, strategic, and structural. So we'll have three of those that we'll be learning about. Family therapy is a form of psychotherapy seeking to reduce distress and family conflict by improving the systems of interactions between the family members. Family therapy is a therapy that works with families and couples in intimate relationships to nurture change and development. Family members are connected emotionally. They affect each other's feelings, thoughts, and emotions, enable family members, couples, and explore difficult thoughts and emotions safely. What defines a family? One, it is a group of people bound together by philosophical, religious, or other convictions with a common ancestry under the same roof. Two, a basic biosocial unit in society having as its nucleus two or more adults living together and cooperating in the care and rearing of their own or adopted children. And that's from the dictionary. Bless you.
Oh, sorry.
The American Indian family today. American Indians would define family as members made up of blood-related and non-blood-related, adopted, extended family, tribal community, and the nation of American Indians as a whole today. And I included this because I was raised by my grandparents and I had several uncles, and one of them that I became very close to, and I'm still very close to him. My grandmother, I always thought he was our blood relative, but she said she adopted him because he had no mother and just his dad was raising him. And we were taught when they come into your home, or any of my children's friends, when they come into my home, they make themselves at home. They fix themselves something to drink, something to eat. And that's how I was raised in my home by my grandparents. So we have a lot of adopted family. And some of my best friends, I think, are even closer than my own family. So I consider those my sisters. Some history of the family. In the 16th century, the father was the dominant head of the household, usually authoritarian. The mother was to stay home and cook and clean and take care of the husband. And in the 18th century, the father was working outside of the home. The mother assumed all responsibility for parenting, cooking, cleaning, nurse, taking care of the husband. Pretty much reminds me of like the Beaver, Leave It to Beaver movies of the ideal family, how they live. And again, the last presentation will focus on the Native American life. So if you're not relating to this too well, we'll cover that later. Diversity in family structure. We have the traditional family, usually the mother, the father, and the 2.5 kids. Some parents are single parents, grandparents are involved. Like I said, I was raised by my grandparents, and it's not something that they had to do. It's just how we live our life. The family structure can be gay or lesbian. And there is also teenage parenthood, usually very young parents that aren't prepared to be parents, and sometimes they do need some help. And they can be a divorced family. A lot of families nowadays are learning to co-parent and cooperate with each other. So even though the child might be living in separate homes, there's sometimes some family issues involved in that needs to be addressed. And then the family therapy as a therapeutic modality. This is to be used when overt conflict is recognized in members of the same family and psychotherapeutic interventions are required. So one of the children could be acting out, maybe the father could be having some problems and the family just doesn't know what to do or what they should do. And they realize that whatever's happening is impacting them as a unit. Family therapy is an essential intervention in a family system to change the family, usually for the better. The family unit, which is being treated for better interactions among each other. So it's helping them to learn to get along. One of the things that I've learned in providing family therapy, especially in the addiction setting, is that communication is not good at all in a lot of families, and it's not their fault. It's just continuing those cycles that were learned and passed on and passed down until they can get some help to really express what it is they're thinking and feeling. And counseling is usually the safest place for them to be able to share that until they learn to do it on their own. This can be conducted at the office, or now there are a lot of home visiting programs. Next door in Colorado, there are programs that go into the homes. The counselors work late in the day and on the weekends, and that's because the kids are in school and the parents are usually working. And I thought that was a really great concept. I don't know how it would be welcomed on the reservation, but I did have a home visiting program several years ago. And from my experience, for the most part, it went well. There is a maximum of about 20 sessions are planned. And by the end of the 10th session, changes can be seen. Again, this is up to the therapist as to what type of problems will be addressed, the treatment plan, and a lot of times it does not have to be 20 sessions. If you're solution focused and you want to get this moving a little faster, you may cut this down to 12. I usually run my family sessions about 90 minutes because there's more than one person that needs to talk so that everybody has enough time to share in the family session. A definition of family therapy is a psychotherapeutic approach focusing on interactions between a couple within a nuclear family or its members in an extended family or between the family or other interpersonal system. This should be with the goal, sorry about the typos again, of alleviating problems initially presented by family members, family subsystems, the family as a whole, or other referral sources. Common reasons for seeking family therapy. Again, One of the common ones have been for me, especially when I was working with juvenile delinquents, was when the child is having a problem at school, using drugs or disordered eating, a major trauma or change that impacts the entire family. So maybe they've had to move, there's been a natural disaster, maybe the house burned down, incarceration of a family member, an unexpected or traumatic loss of a family member. Some children lose their parents at a very young age, and that can be very traumatic for them. Adjustment to a new family member in the home, such as the birth of a new baby, maybe they adopted a kid, there's foster children, or maybe grandparents are not able to care for themselves anymore and they need to come into the home now, which is quite common for Native American families. We generally take care of our elderly so that they don't go to nursing homes to be taken care of. And I've seen that to be quite common with the Latino population as well. Domestic violence could be a good reason for counseling. And divorce. Kids really have a hard time dealing with divorce. A lot of times the divorce people are trying to decide if they want to get divorced, so they'll come to counseling, or usually the person that gets left in the relationship really struggles with that, and they often seek counseling for themselves. And of course, there's always parent conflict. We need to help them learn how to manage conflicts that they're having so that it doesn't have a negative impact on the children. I always tell them that without realizing it, we're our kids' number one teacher. A lot of what they learn about life comes from living in the home and how we handle things. So a lot of times it's looking at how they grew up, of, you know, how did that lead to the problem that they have, that they learned that can be changed. Okay, some of the founders that started family therapy. The first one is the Systemic Family Therapy by Murray Bowen. Sometimes it's called Bowen Family Therapy. He was born in January of 1913. Bowen was a 20th century psychiatrist who developed family systemic therapy, also known as Bowen theory, graduated from the University of Tennessee with a bachelor's degree in science in 1934. So like I said, a lot of this was developed by the Western population. The next theory we will look at is the Structural Family Therapy by Salvador Minuchin. He was born in 1921 in San Salvador, Argentina. In 1947, he earned a degree in medicine and briefly opened a pediatrics practice before joining the Israeli army to help protect the newly established state. He is a contemporary psychiatrist who helped to develop family therapy and pioneered the field of structural therapy. And a lot of these came from the field of psychiatry, as you'll see. And then the third one we'll be learning about today is the Strategic Family Therapy by Jay Haley. He was born on July 19th in 1923 in Midwest, Wyoming. And that's where I'm at. Jay Haley was a 20th century psychotherapist who helped develop brief therapy, family therapy, and strategic psychotherapy. He studied in the University of California in Los Angeles. Okay, we'll start with the systemic. Systemic family therapy is an approach that works with families and those who are in close relationships to foster change. These changes are viewed in terms of systems of reflection between each person in the family or relationship. It is rooted in family therapy, a therapeutic adaptation of a larger interdisciplinary field known as systems theory. Systems theory is a study of complex systems present in nature, science, and society, and its framework investigates and describes any group of objects that work together to produce a result. So being the group of objects would be the family members. Bowen's key techniques are to talk to the therapist, not to each other, to keep emotional reactivity and anxiety in sessions lower. Person-to-person relationships, it allows them to share their personal thoughts and feelings directly with the therapist. Asking frequent factual questions serves to focus on thinking and intellectual processes. Emotional neutrality, therapist remains emotionally neutral to taking sides. So when you're working with the family is your client. Everybody in the room is your client, not just the mom or the child. So it's really hard to keep those boundaries and be fair to everyone that's attending. Genograms are used to organize family information. So this Bowen technique uses the genogram. I'll cover that a little later in this presentation. And the de-triangling, which is a process of remaining objective. Goals of family therapy are facilitating awareness of how the emotional system functions. Increasing levels of differentiation where the focus is on making changes for the self rather than on trying to change others. And a lot of times people get stressed because people are behaving in a manner that they have no control over. So a lot of times in therapy, even on an individual basis, I always bring it back to the diagram of an egg. I draw a big circle and then I put the small circle in the middle. And so what's in the big circle is everything we don't have control over. And then in the little circle in the middle of that egg, I say, this is what you have control of, you know, and I ask them to tell me what goes in here. And then it helps them to kind of picture like, yeah, you're right. I can't control people, but here's how I'm going to deal with the situation. So a lot of times the whole family is dealing with the situation and they have to learn how to effectively cope with that. Some common reasons for therapy, again, problems in school, substance abuse or eating disorders, trauma, unexpected loss of family member, new family member in the home, domestic violence, divorce, and parental conflict. Some concepts used are fusion, differentiation, triangles, the nuclear family, sibling positions, family projection, emotional fusion, and transmission. The therapist's role is to connect with the family without becoming emotionally reactive, has a differentiated stance, and is calm and interested in helping the family. Systems theory and systemic therapy can be applied to individuals, couples, and in a variety of other settings. Commonly practiced in a family setting, and it does not seek to address people on an individual level, and instead it focuses on understanding the problems in a contextual framework. So it's not singling out any person for causing the problem or triggering the problems, but it's looking at how the whole family works together. The systemic therapy perspective on problems is family therapy and systemic practice supports the notion that family relationships are a key part of the emotional health of each member within the family. So having relationships with everyone in your family is really important. Helping people who care for each other find ways to cope collaboratively with any distress, misunderstanding, and pain that is affecting their relationship in the family. Conditions that get given labels such as depression, anxiety, and conduct disorder are very often effects on a relationship. Common problems include stressful and traumatic events, work and school related problems, psychosexual difficulties, and parent-child conflict. Conversely, when systemic family therapists see someone in psychological distress, they look first for relationships that have gone wrong. So a lot of times a family member might blame themselves for one of the children being diagnosed with depression or ADHD. So it's helping them to accept that, it's not their fault. Some advantages of systemic interactional-based therapies are relationship problems are usually best treated within the relationships. Problems are being treated in the context in which they arose. The other people in the family are grouped with close relationship or a powerful and nearly always willing resource for change. So those families that actually seek counseling are the ones that realize they have a problem and they want to do something about it. Oftentimes, I see clients individually as, part of their treatment program. And I had one particularly this last year who just really focused on her parent of being a big problem. And a lot of that just came down to communication issues and being afraid to tell each other what they really feel. And once she was able to get some family therapy with her and her mother and her sister, I think things got a lot better. And so I was really glad that they came to get help together as a family. Therapeutic gains that have been achieved in collaboration with the family and other relational systems are most likely to continue as the person moves forward in their context of everyday living. So it's always our hope that they take whatever they learned and are able to continue doing that to make their family relationship better. How systemic family therapy works. Systemic family therapy has developed a varied repertoire or compilation of highly effective methods that a family therapist can call on to meet the needs of clients and families, which includes awareness of how family processes operate and ability to make these apparent to the family. An ability to work with children in relation to their parents and vice versa. A lot of times families come in because they're having concerns about most often it's been an adolescent child. And working with families to understand and productively use the influence of their function. So what strengths do they have already that they can use to help apply to that situation? Through both conversation and action, helping family members to recognize options they have not been making use of. A lot of times there's things they haven't even thought about. Collaborative exploration of strengths and resources of family members that they can bring to bear to support each other. A lot of times mothers are overwhelmed in the family system. Nowadays, a lot of families have two parents. Both parents have to work just to survive these days. And so the family that tends to think a lot of the domestic duties is the female role in the family puts a lot of stress on the mother. So it's waking the family up to realize that they have a part in helping her to not be so stressed. What are their roles and what can they do to help make that better? Some important concepts are understanding the general systems theory, feedback and homeostasis, deal with ways in which their systems and their unit function, feedback, the communication pattern within the units of a system, and two basic patterns of communication, linear and circular. And so a lot of times when you bring a family in, it might be a good idea to have some activity that they can do together so that you can see how they work together on projects. And oftentimes I've discovered that they just haven't been spending time doing things like playing a board game or working on a craft together. So sometimes it's just simple little things that needs to happen on a regular basis to improve family communication. There's linear causality and circularity. So the linear causality, communication occurs in a single direction. So it's just one-way communication. For example, when my wife had a stroke, I thought we all had to pitch in at home in running the house. Well, I think that's good. Circularity, each unit may change and thus affect any of the other units. So that's tends to go in a circle. An example quote I have here: my wife's in the chair most of the day. Helen comes home after school, leaves her books out, doesn't come home until after dinner. I'm angry at Helen for not helping. I wish my wife would do more. She seems to think that I do not do enough. This is the husband's perspective. So there's two different perspectives there. And everybody needs to understand their role and not have a scapegoat. This is an example of linear communication, and this talks about Pam aims, throws, Bob aims and throws. And so this is an aquarium. So they might have a baseball, might even have a rock. And then this is the pattern. So if they both hit the aquarium, it shatters. And if they don't, then the aquarium stays intact, but then the water can overflow and spill. Or if somebody's carrying the aquarium, the water will slosh around and water's going to spill, and then it's going to end up on the carpet. So it's looking at how everything has the impact to, in this case, water as example. Circular causality. The same happens in most human interactions. Stan and his boss are stuck in a pattern that mutually reinforces each other negatively. So in this cycle here, Stan makes mistakes when his boss watches him. Stan's boss gets concerned about Stan's job performance and speaks to Stan about his mistakes. Stan gets nervous and feels intimidated by his boss. So this is just a continuous cycle without intervening and exploring what can be done so that those concerns don't continue and they just keep going through the cycle, would be to create a improvement plan of these are the steps that you're going to take. So I won't be watching you. Linear causality and circular causality. Again, like I said, the linear is the cause and the result, and the circular causality is the cause and the result, which can continue in a loop like that without interruption. Here's the linear cause and effect. Again, we were talking about the aquarium. Circular interaction is observed and not blaming. The idea in family systems therapy, the emphasis is on the process rather than the content. So when we talk about the process, it's how everyone is reacting in that situation and not focusing on problems. And when you're doing any family therapy, we don't want to use negative tones, negative words, and blaming someone for causing the problems. Focus on what's happening in the present rather than what happened or the sequence of events that led up to the event. So what's happening right now? We're not focused on the past. We're not going into the future. How is this affecting the family now? Homeostasis. Systems have a tendency to seek stability and equilibrium. So like I said, when families know they're having a problem and they're willing to help it and seek help, they know when it's time to get help. A family system attempts to regulate itself so that stability and equilibrium can be maintained. Some important concepts to remember. Homeostasis. Systems have a tendency to seek stability and equilibrium. So even though things might be chaotic in the home, the systems are going to be, how can we get this normal and get it more balanced so it's not so stressful? The process by which equilibrium is achieved is feedback from the units, family members. In family, new information is brought into a system that affects its stability. Two basic types of feedback are negative and positive, so we need to try to be as positive as we can. Positive feedback, changes occur in the system. Negative feedback, equilibrium is achieved. Here's an example. If Helen's father talks about why Helen is late and works with her to reduce that behavior, that causes equilibrium, and negative feedback affects the family system. So she doesn't like that. If instead he gets angry and yells at her, she may stay out late more often, and the system is changed through the use of positive feedback processes. Thus, positive feedback is seen as having an unhelpful impact. So his being angry, that had a negative impact on her. Depending on the nature of the change that occurs, positive feedback might also be helpful. So like I said, a lot of times it just comes down to communication, and when communication isn't getting through and people get frustrated, they tend to get angry. Who gets systemic therapy? It is sensitive to diverse family forms, relationships, beliefs, and cultures. Considerate of the needs and problems of each individual within a family unit, and takes into account all other key relationships in the family's lives. It's a useful approach for all ages and backgrounds, families from socially, economically disadvantaged backgrounds, and families who have children with behavioral issues. And when I look at any theory or any technique to work with people as a therapist, I always look at how does this work for me, coming from being Native American, and how would it be received. A typical family therapy clinic has deal with a great variety of physical and psychological difficulties. Families will vary widely in terms of family structure, ethnicity, and culture. Treatment most often consists of about 7 sessions spread over 6 months. So oftentimes you might see people weekly for the first time and then spread those out so they have time to practice a lot of what they're learning in between. Ultimately, all elements of family therapy, including the setting, family therapy techniques, and length of sessions, will result from a collaboration and mutual agreement between the therapist and the family. So that is when we make a plan of what we're going to work on and how long it's going to take, so that they have input into what their therapy is going to look like. So the structural family therapy was developed by Salvador Minuchin, dealing with problems as they affect current interactions of family members. Of particular interest are boundaries between the family members, therapeutic approaches, changing the nature and intensity of relationships within family, inside and outside of the therapy session. So there may be homework given, and I just had a group last night where we talked about boundaries, and one of the ladies said she just realized that she has really horrible boundaries. And so I always feel glad when they make that connection in working with them. Some concepts are how families operate as a system and their structure within that system. Minuchin forms an impression of family based on organization of the family, rules and guidelines that they use to make decisions. So there's the family structure, there's those family subsystems, the boundary permeability. So do you have rigid boundaries? Are they loose boundaries, or are there none? And alignments and coalitions. So these are different interactions within a family system. Family structure. Rules have been developed to determine who interacts with who. Temporary or long-standing. It's Minuchin's view that there should be a hierarchical structure within the family. And when taking these into consideration, it's not something that I say we need to take word for word. It's how you choose to work with it. But being aware of family rules and structure is very important for the therapist to determine how to help the family make changes. Family subsystems. For a family to function well, members must work together to carry out functions. As I was saying, it takes 2 family members to work these days, so everybody should have a role in helping make that work for everyone. The most obvious subsystems are the husband and wife, parents, children, and siblings. Marital subsystems is to meet the changing needs of the 2 partners. Parental subsystem is usually father-mother team, but may also parent or another relative who is responsible for raising the children. In sibling subsystems, children learn how to relate with their brother or sister and how to build coalitions and meet their own needs as well as deal with their parents. And other subsystems may develop, such as a child and parent subsystem. Boundary permeability describes the type of contact that members within the family system and subsystems have with each other. High permeable boundary would be found in enmeshed family, where non-permeable or rigid boundary would be found in a disengaged family. Alignments and coalitions in responding to crisis or dealing with daily events. Families may have ways that subsystems within the family interact. Alignments refer to the way family members join each other or oppose each other in dealing with an activity. Coalitions refer to alliances between family members against another family member. Sometimes they're flexible and sometimes they are fixed. Minuchin uses the term triangle more specifically than does Bowen to describe coalition, in which each parent demands that the child side with him against the other parent. Thus, power within the family shifts depending on alignments and coalitions. So the triangulation is when two family members kind of gang up against the one. They both see a problem, and that creates problems with the interaction. Goals are to bring about change within the family, establish boundaries within the family that are not too rigid or too flexible, help the family system use power in a way that functions well for them. Some techniques: family mapping. The family maps out the interaction to allow the therapist to understand repeated dysfunctional behavior. So strategies for modification can be applied. Minuchin symbols for family mapping are right here in this diagram. So he may be using a dry erase board, which I often use to draw on. Accommodating and joining. By joining a family system, a structural therapist not only has a good understanding of the family's systemic operation, but it is also in a good position to make changes in it. To bring about change within a family, Minuchin believes it's important to join a family system and accommodate to its way of interacting. An example of joining the family is mimesis, which refers to imitating the style and content of a family's communications. Enactment: by instructing the family to act out a conflict, the therapist can work with problems as they appear in the present rather than as they are reported. This coalition also allows the therapist to understand alliances and make suggestions for changing the family subsystem. Intensity can be achieved by having the family draw out an interaction or repeat it. As the therapist becomes familiar with the family style of interaction for boundaries, more suggestions for change might develop. Changing boundaries: as a therapist observes the family interacting either in an enactment or general presentation, the therapist uses boundary marking to note boundaries in the family. To change boundaries, therapists may rearrange the seating of family members and change the distance between them. They may also wish to unbalance the structure so that power within the subsystem changes. Reframing: there are several ways to see an event or situation, or to reframe it, relabeling the problematic behavior and viewing it in a new, more positive light that emphasizes a good intention. So taking some negative interaction that might be occurring and finding a way for them to see that it can be used in a better manner. Strategic family therapy that was developed by Jay Haley. Focusing on the problem, strategic therapists design the best way to reach the family's goals. In developing his approach, Jay Haley was influenced by Milton Erickson, who was also known for his hypnotic and paradoxical techniques. Concepts like Minuchin, looking at the interaction. That's a big part of the family therapy, is how do they interact, and being able to create opportunities where they can interact with each other as normally as possible with the therapist being present. What separates structural from strategic approaches is the attention given by strategic family therapists to the symptoms. For Haley, symptoms are an unacknowledged way of communicating within the family, usually when there's no other solution to a problem. For strategic therapists, the symptom is often a metaphor for a way of feeling or being within the family. Goals are to help the family show love and caring and interventions, and less on power in the family relationship. So it's not about controlling everyone. Techniques: because the presenting problem is the focus of strategic therapy, tasks to alleviate the problem or symptoms are its cornerstone. Generally, tasks are two types: straightforward, where the therapist gives directions and suggestions, and paradoxical tasks for families that may resist change. Straightforward tasks: the therapist, when a strategic family therapist judges that the family they are trying to help is likely to comply with their suggestion, they may assign a straightforward task. In strategic family therapy, the therapist is the expert, and she or he may make use of their status as the expert to get them to comply. Design tasks with particularly metaphorical tasks takes experience and confidence. So someone who's experienced can do that, not someone who's fairly new to working with families. Sometimes, however, straightforward tasks, whether they are metaphorical or direct, may not be sufficient to bring about change. So this is where I talk about often we may have to change what technique we're using. Paradoxical tasks basically are suggestions that ask the family to continue the behavior for which they are wanting help in such a way that whether they comply or not, positive change will result. And an example that I would give for that would be maybe the mother and daughter are having a lot of conflict all the time. So maybe I might tell them, oh, why don't you set a schedule for when you guys are all home, and make an appointment, and maybe ask them how long their conflict takes place, and ask them to schedule that amount of time for them to argue and have conflict with each other. So that might be surprising to them, but it works. The therapist is trying to get the family to decide not to do what they're being asked to do. Families are often confused why the therapist is not asking them to change. Use of paradoxical directives takes experience and confidence on the part of the therapist, and they are used only when family resists straightforward suggestions. So rather than telling them that they shouldn't be doing that, we'll tell them, you know what, let's schedule a time for you guys to argue and fight. Each strategic family therapy intervention is different depending on the observations of the family structure. Interventions are straightforward, are paradoxical, and are thought out clearly and carefully. So this isn't just something you can do at the spur of a moment. Therapists start to use interventions. It is suggested that they do so under supervision and can discuss their observations of family power struggles. So if you're new to family therapy, you want to have a good supervisor. Family therapy is a multi-layered process. It's about forming a relationship, conducting an assessment, hypothesizing and sharing meaning, and facilitating change. The first is to form a relationship with the family. Your first couple sessions are just getting to know them and focusing on what it is they want to work on. Almost always facilitated by the why, what, where, and when, and understanding and accepting things just as they are. Conducting an assessment often emphasizes genograms. And I know a lot of you always ask if there's assessments, and I tried to look up one yesterday and it was very expensive. And I thought, you know, I'll stick with the genogram and doing my assessment by just talking to the family. And there are important symbols in a genogram. I'll share that. Hypothesizing and sharing meaning. Meaning form a set of ideas about people, systems, and situations to focus on meaning in a useful way. Working with the family, you have to have passion, interest, and curiosity to ask questions and gather information and perspectives of the family member. And the therapist is in charge of the process, not the people. So sometimes they might want to take over and you have to remind them. Goals are to conjoin the hypothesis and sharing ideas, getting feedback from family members, developing a good fit with each other, to cement a working relationship, engage without giving up their right to discard anything that does not fit, redirect the conversation towards more useful conceptualization. And 4 is to facilitate change. This is to see what happens when the family is viewed as a collaborative process. Techniques are important. 2 common forms of facilitation are enactments and assignment of tasks. Enactment means instructing the family to act out a conflict, purpose to understand the family's union and suggestions of how to change the system, knowing the goals and purposes for behaviors, feelings, and interaction gives them choice about their use and provide multiple paths for challenging patterns and the enactment of new possibilities. The family system from a multicultural perspective is we really want to focus on the strengths that the family brings in. Also placing a great value on extended family. Each family has its own unique culture. There are feminist voices throughout the world. The therapist can look for ways in which culture can inform and modify work. Shortcomings would not have the same conceptualization of time or emotions. And when we talk about Indian time, I always schedule time between my sessions when I'm working on, especially on the reservation, because a lot of times people are late and something's going on and I know they're going to show up. And so it could throw your whole schedule off, but if you learn to put that time in between there, it can help alleviate that. And I've learned that from my experience. Okay, yeah, and practitioners assuming Western models or family are universal. So those that are not native and don't understand the culture, it could really have some problems there. Techniques used, again, we talked about enactment already. That's having the family act out a situation that they're having trouble with. Sculpting is taking family members and putting them in a particular arrangement. And some techniques continued. Circular reasoning, ask family members the same question about the same events. So getting story from each person. Cognitive restructuring, modifying perception of events to bring about behavior change. The miracle question, this is often used in solution-focused family counseling, such as, you know, consider you woke up today and a miracle happened and the problem you came here for is gone. What would that look like? You know, how would you feel? So that's when you know they actually can envision that this can change for the better. And externalization, viewing the problem as outside of themselves, often used by narrative therapists. The genogram is a technique used in early family therapy. This can be used for assessment. I have liked to use this a lot with couples because a lot of times their conflict comes from the way they were raised and their upbringing. So being able to look at all of the family members and the different patterns that have occurred. Here's an example of a genogram that I put in here. They usually suggest you cover like 3 generations of family members. So you might be looking at the mother and father. If people are deceased, that would be the exes. If anybody is adopted, there's a dotted line. You might want to indicate the cause of death. For here, it was suicide, cancer, alcoholism, and heart failure. So being able to see those kinds of problems in the family. And then there are stages of treatment. The initial phase is negotiating with the family what they want to work on. The middle phase is, you know, redefining the problem, what's changing, what's working so far. And then the final phase is being able to take the tools home that they learned and use those. Roles and functions of the family therapist are to facilitate structural change, to change the functioning of the family for the better, and behavior change. It's helping clients get rid of the old behavior patterns and find some new ones. Experiential change, helping families learn more effective ways of communicating with each other and how to express what they're experiencing. helping family to learn to ask for what they want from one another. Like I said, a lot of families come in and they don't even communicate with each other appropriately. So it's just learning how to ask. And a lot of people are afraid to ask. So it's being able to feel safe and comfortable doing that. How family therapy helps. The clients are challenged to establish a more honest relationship, helps the clients recognize how they have hidden their emotions or real feelings instead of being defensive or coercive secondary emotions. Cognitive change, provide the families with insight and understanding, gain awareness of one's family ledger, insight into introjects are reprojected onto current family members to compensate for unsatisfactory early object relations, open up conversations about clients' values, beliefs, and purposes so they have an opportunity to consider a wide range of choices that match meaning to their experience. So whatever those core beliefs and values that they have, that how can you apply this to your family situation? And that's all I have for today. Like I said, if you want to do more of this, I can continue some different theories the next session. And we have a short poll. I was wanting to get some feedback to see what I'll present next month when I do the second presentation. So we can open this up for questions, comments. And there's the poll. When I worked with the Air Force here in Cheyenne, I did a lot of couples counseling and I had a lot of fun doing it. It was something I really started to enjoy. So I put that out there because I've done a lot of work there. Okay. 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 People are still responding. Okay. I think. Okay, it says 86% voted, so there's still a few people out there. Okay, we got 94% now. And the top ones are looking like the family dynamics of addiction and resilient families. And just by looking at the outcome of this right now, I could probably do family dynamics of addiction and resilient families together for the next session. Cool. Thank you guys for participating in that. Do I have any audience members that are currently doing family counseling? Okay. Any questions? Hit this stop share. Move this down. Okay. Well, I guess if nobody has any questions, thank you for being here today and learning about what I have to share about family therapy. And it looks like our second session will be on families and addiction. And I'll include resiliency for part of that as well. Thank you, guys.